welcome to Russ's Kitchen. Now on my YouTube channel I've already got a video for a loaf of white crusty bread. It's a very simple recipe. It works every time, but do you want to now go up to the next level and make something a little bit more complex? Well, I've got a recipe here that is really something else. I'm going to show you a wholemeal version of this. The recipe and the technique is exactly the same as if you were going to use just a normal strong white bread flour. But for this one, I'm actually going to make a wholemeal loaf that is going to taste delicious, trust me. Let's have a look at what we're going to need. It's not a lot. So in one bowl I've got 400 grams of very strong wholemeal flour. You can just use standard wholemeal flour, but I like to use this very strong wholemeal flour. The other difference between my previous recipe and this recipe is that I'm using dry active yeast, not dry yeast, dry active yeast. There's going to be quite a difference, trust me. I'm using a teaspoon of salt and about 250 mils of warm water. So the first thing that we need to do is incorporate our salt into the flour. Just going to give that a little mix round. And then we're going to take our warm water and put it into a different bowl and then dissolve the dry active yeast into that water. Now when I say warm, if you've got a probe thermometer, I'm kind of looking normally about 35 degrees to 37 degrees tends to be good. You don't want it boiling, you don't want it too hot. So we put the warm water into the bowl and then we're taking a teaspoon of our dry active yeast and we're going to spread that into the water, give it a mix until it dissolves. Right, so the yeast is now dissolved into the warm water. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave that now just for about a minute, just so that yeast starts to work and starts to come alive. Right, so the yeast is all nicely dissolved into our warm water. Again, it's been standing there for about a minute. The yeast is now starting to work. There's a few little bubbles that are starting to appear on top, so that's great. We've got yeast working its magic. So the next thing is to take our flour and our salt that we've mixed together. That's going to go into the water. So again, straight away, if you have looked at the other bread recipe, you'll see this is the difference, that we're adding the dry ingredients into the wet, not the other way around. So let's go in with all of that flour. Now I've got a very useful dough spatula here. You could just use a wooden spoon, but these are really handy because it's flexible and you can scrape everything off the inside of this nice steel bowl. So let's get that going, mixing it all together. So you can see just how easy that dough came together. I did have to add just a little bit of water during the mixing process for that because wholemeal flour does really soak up the water as you mix it. So I did just add a tiny little bit more. But as you can see, that dough has now come together. It's looking good at that stage. Next thing we're going to do is grab a clean tea towel. I'm going to put that over the top of the bowl, but on top of that, I'm going to take a plate, press it down. That's just going to help seal that bowl a little bit easier. Now I'm going to leave this for 10 minutes and then we're going to come back and we're going to start the first process of kneading. Right, so the dough has rested now for 10 minutes and we're now going to begin a very slow kneading process. The kneading process is for each stage is rather quick, but we then leave it to rest in between each stage for 10 minutes. And that process we're going to repeat 4 times. So let me show you what that actual kneading process is. So the process that we use to start kneading this dough is you pull apart from the center, fold it back and press, and we turn the bowl, and we repeat that process, turning, folding into the center. Repeat that between 8 and 10 times. And then take our tea cloth, cover it over again with our plate, and we let that rest for 10 minutes, and then we repeat the process again. And like I said, we do that 4 times. Okay, so this is now the 4th and final stage of this kneading process. And as you can see, the dough is now very smooth. It's come together nicely. It's not sticky at all. Now I'm going to move this into a lightly oiled bowl. It's the same bowl that I use the dry ingredients for, that I've cleaned out. You can, if you want, leave this in this original bowl, but I've tried it, and by the time it's risen, it can be a little bit awkward to get out. So that's why I lightly oil, a little bit of olive oil, lightly oil this bowl. I'm going to take the dough out. It comes out nice and easy. Put it into this bowl. Same thing. I'm covering it with our tea towel. Plate on. Now that is now going to stand for at least an hour. And if your room is nice and warm, we're in the middle of summer while I'm doing this, and of course it is really, really warm in the kitchen, that will be easily risen in an hour. Now, if you're doing this in the winter and it's a little bit cold, what you can do, pre-warm up your oven, turn the oven off just so the oven is just nice and warm, and you can use that as a proving station. So you could actually put the bowl into that, make sure the oven is turned off, make sure it's not too hot, just a bit warm, and that, if you're doing this in the winter, is really going to help this process. So there it is, it's all in the bowl, and we're going to let this sit for an hour. Right, so after about an hour, maybe slightly over an hour, we've got our dough, which is pretty much doubled in size. Now we need to be very careful now. We don't want to knock this around too much. We want to keep as much of that natural air that's now developed into the dough. We want to keep that inside. So not very much kneading now, and whatever we do is going to be quite careful. So a little bit of flour on my fingers, and I'm just going to knock that back very slightly. And what I'm trying to do is just pull it into a slightly oblong shape. And then I'm going to take one side, fold it over. I'm going to press down, and then take the other side and fold that over. And again, press that dough down so that it sticks to each other. I'm then going to turn the dough and do the same with the other sides. Keeping the seams pushed together. Now if I turn the dough over, that's looking quite neat. So, got our loaf tin. Now this loaf tin is about 8.5 inch by 4 inches. So it's actually quite a large loaf tin. If you're using a slightly smaller one, maybe 6 inch by 4.5 inches or 4 inches, you might want to reduce the mixture of this down to 300 grams of flour, and then 3/4 teaspoons of salt, 3/4 teaspoons of the yeast. And that will be giving you a really good quantity to work with on a smaller scale. But for this size loaf tin, then I found that this works out about the right quantity. So now we're going to take this, put it into our loaf tin, and once again we're going to cover it with a tea towel, and we're going to leave that to rise again for about 40 minutes. Okay, so 40 minutes sitting in the loaf tin, and look how much more that's risen. That's looking really, really good. So you can see that this recipe there are a lot more techniques to it, there's a lot more stages to it, and this is our last stage, which is actually putting it into the oven and cooking it. But this also has just a tiny little difference to the previous bread recipe. What I've done is I've taken one of the racks in the oven, put it slightly higher, and in the bottom, directly under that, I've got a roasting tin. Now, in that roasting tin, once this goes into the oven, I'm going to put a cup of water into that, and that is going to create steam that's going to help this cook while it's in the oven. It's going to take about 20 to 25 minutes to cook, that's all. So while this has been proving in the loaf tin, I've preheated my oven to 240 degrees. Now I'm going to turn that down now to 200, because that oven is now really very, very hot. So the next thing to do simply is to put this into the oven, put the water into the roasting pan, and then just wait for 20-25 minutes. What I would say is, if you're using a fan assisted oven, after about 10-12 minutes you might just want to turn this round 180 degrees, because they tend not to cook quite as evenly. So here we go into the oven. And here we are 25 minutes later, and we have our beautiful wholemeal home cooked bread. Just look at that. Absolutely gorgeous. Give it a try. I know there's a lot more stages to it. I know it takes a little bit more time. Maybe you could be doing other stuff while you're waiting for that to rise and prove. If it's a Sunday afternoon, start preparing Sunday dinner while you're waiting for this. Absolutely fantastic. It's not that difficult. Give it a go. And if you do give it a go, please write some comments. Let me know how you get on. And like, share, subscribe, and enjoy homemade bread.